Alright, what up, Museum Hack? So, here is the deal. I have been given creative shifts. What does that mean? It means I have time to develop new pieces for us all to use, not just myself, on our tours, so you can always drop in new, fresh stuff into your tours. Not that you need my help with that, I know that, just saying. So I figured the best way to get this information out would be to make a video. I could write you up a 5-page or 6-page document and send it to you, and you could have to read it, but that's not really that cool. A video is much easier, so now you are watching this video. So I'll link to any relevant links or articles or documents, or actually the painting and other paintings like that below this. But otherwise, this will be a full, just little 10-minute package, maybe 12. And once you watch this, you'll be able to do a new piece on your tours. So, the painting we're going to be talking about is by Chuck Close. It's called Lucas. I'll post a link to it below. So just imagine that we're up in the modern art section of the Met, not where the Jackson Pollock paintings and Rothko paintings are upstairs, but downstairs in that long white hallway where there's all those sort of pretty weird paintings. You definitely know what I'm talking about. And the first thing about this piece is that it's actually meant to change as you're looking at it from different distances. So when you're walking up to it, you'll notice that from 20 meters away, it looks totally different than a meter away. Sort of like a pointillist painting. The colors mix optically and blend in your eye and create a really, really cool effect. So I actually tell people this when we first walk into the room. If I'm coming up from that staircase over here, and we can see the painting from across the room, I just tell people, look at it here from this distance away, and as we walk up to it, notice how it changes. If you're coming from the other angle, like you came down from the Jackson Pollock section, that's cool too. You can just tell people that as your last thing. When you're walking away and leaving, look over your shoulder, and you'll see how this changes as we move away from it. The way I want to do this is I'll just give you the spiel as though, we're standing next to the painting and you're a visitor with us, and then I'll give you sort of the background into what I'm thinking in my mind about how I'm structuring the piece as we go along. So anyway, now I'm going to pretend that you are a visitor. This is what I pretty much tell visitors every time. So here we are in the Met, obviously, magic. And we're looking at one of my favorite paintings in the Met by one of my favorite contemporary artists. His name is Chuck Close. And the thing about Chuck Close is that he got his start in Washington. That's where he grew up. He went to school in Washington. And then he decided, I want to step it up a little bit. And he went to Yale to get his MFA in painting. In case you don't know, getting your MFA from Yale is basically sort of like your best ticket into being a cool painter in the modern art world. A huge chunk of modern contemporary painters that are cool went to Yale to get their MFA. And it's one way, sort of like an incubator for new artists. A lot of attention is focused on it, and it's a pretty good bet if you want to become a cool, new, modern, popular painter. I worked for Chuck Close. Good for him. And when he was graduating from Yale, he had started to work on the themes that would pretty much become the only themes he worked with for the rest of his life. Right when he graduated, he had this huge landscape painting, except it wasn't a landscape, it was a photorealistic image of a woman laying down. Pretty awesome. But soon after that, he started to gravitate away from this theme of like the body and the full human and things like that, and started to focus on what would be the subject of actually pretty much every single painting he would do for the rest of his life. A human face, no fancy tilts or anything like that, no fancy cropping, just looking straight onto the camera and cropped just like you see this image right here. Again, I'll link to it below. And these images run on a spectrum from being A, photorealistic, or B, being this kind of abstract, pixelated, hyper-luminescent image like we're looking at here. So we'll talk about that in a second. For the photorealistic images, basically what he does is he has someone come to his studio. Normally it's like a friend or another artist or things like that. And he will actually snap a photo from them and work from that photo for the rest of the painting-making process. What he says, sort of a cool theory about art, is that if you have someone come to your studio, and they come maybe, one day a week for a month, or every day for a month, or whatever it is, what's going to happen is you're going to end up getting the sort of gray, dull average of them coming to see you every day. One day they're hungry, one day they're angry, one day they're happy, one day they're sad, and in the end, you're not going to have a painting that looks sad or angry or hungry. It's going to look just like a gray average of all those things, and it's not going to be that cool. So he circumnavigates that by taking the photo. He says in that way, then he's working from what someone really actually looks like in one cross-section instant moment of time, and you get a way more accurate image. So pretty cool idea for how to work on a painting. And it's sort of funny. The other photorealistic image I've seen from Chuck Close that's up at the Met is actually, I'll link to it below again. So it looks like someone who is sort of like a 50s used car salesman, like movie character kind of person. He has really, really greasy, slicked over hair, got these huge glasses, really thin, pencil thin mustache. He's wearing sort of like a funny flannel shirt, so it looks like quite the character. And actually, that's intentional. What this person, one of Chuck Close's friends, knew was that pretty much every time someone gets painted by Chuck Close, they get all excited. They're like, oh my god, this is going to be so awesome. Chuck Close is going to pay me. There's going to be this image of me. It's going to be so dope. And they go to the opening and see the painting for the first time, and they're actually really, really freaked out. Seeing every like hair on their face and mole and tear duct and everything blown up, photorealistic at 10 feet by 10 feet, actually really freaks them out. And Chuck Close has said that pretty much everyone he paints afterwards, they actually do some like radical change to their appearance because they can't stand to be this image they've seen again blown up mercilessly at 10 feet by 10 feet. So this friend of Chuck Close, the one that looks like the 50s used car salesman in the painting, actually anticipated that. He didn't want to be freaked out seeing his regular appearance blown up so big, so he made himself up to look like sort of a character, nothing like he looks like in day-to-day life, and had his photo taken, then he went home and just, took off the sort of disguise so he wouldn't be too freaked out to continue being his regular everyday self. Sort of funny. So anyway, actually, before we get off the photorealistic thing, it's cool to note. So right when he first started doing these photorealistic portraits, one of the things he did was he took a tube of Mars black oil paint, sort of like a warm black color, put it into an airbrush, and then did, with just one tube of paint, at least 8 to 10 different massive photorealistic images in black and white, just by taking the airbrush and holding it, far away and close up and painstakingly moving over every square inch of the canvas. He made these really big, beautiful photorealistic portraits, and again, it's all from one tube of paint. The cool thing about it is that allegedly, I read this in the New York Times, that series of painting and that painting making process was the actual inspiration for the modern inkjet printer construction. Pretty awesome. It's actually pretty ballin' as an artist to inspire that. So anyway, that's the photorealistic portraits. That's not what we're looking at here today. Here we have one of these pixelated images, and just for the record, I actually don't really know if he would use that term pixelated, but I'm going to keep using it here. And the way he makes these images, again I'll link to one below, is he takes that photo of someone, and by the way, you can do this yourself if you want to make some art later. He prints it out. I've seen them printed out like 8.5 by 11 on just regular old non-fancy paper. So he has the image, and he draws a grid over it, maybe like 1 inch by 1 inch squares, covering the whole image. And then he also draws a grid on the canvas that he's painting on. So the same grid with the same number of squares all over. And what he does is very simple. He just takes the two, puts one on a table, and the canvas is on the easel, and says, okay, here's the top left square, copy it over here to the top left square, and just like a mathematical machine, copies over each square onto the canvas. And actually, again, you really can do this, and you probably will surprise yourself at the results you get. Actually, most people don't know this is sort of a painting secret, but painters a long time ago definitely used to do that. They would have these little, sort of like a wooden frame, I guess, with like the equivalent of fishing wire running through it, making a grid. They'd grid out their paper, and then they literally would just look through this grid and be able to copy the image directly onto their page. That's how, someone could do a photorealistic painting, a long time ago, without, spending 36 to 50 hours painstakingly copying an image of, a woman sitting by the window with an apple. They would just use the grid and do the drawing in like 10 seconds. Sort of a painting cheat that I'm letting you in on. So anyway, what's unique for Chuck Close is not this grid copying method, but the way in which he does it. When you're up close to the painting, and again I'll link to it below, you can see that each little square is actually sort of a swirling pool of all these different bright and iridescent colors, and it's only once you zoom out enough that you actually see the image in its totality. So it is sort of like pixelization. And he actually relates this little construction method to golfing, oddly enough. He says that, just like in golfing, you go from general to specific. Initially you start out, and you're hitting the ball just in the general, arbitrary direction of the hole, just, it's in this way in general, and then you work and get more specific, and then finally, you just putt in very accurately the ball right into the hole, maybe it's 1 feet away. So the final little sniper shot, getting it in. He says that's just like what this painting method is like. Maybe he's painting like a square inch of my cheek, or a part of my eye, or a part of my ear in this one little square. First it's just a big wash of pink, and then maybe a big wash of yellow, and then a little circle of blue and white, and then finally it just needs a little bit of green, so that when you read it as part of the whole image, it actually looks like a part of my cheek or my ear or something like that. So in the paintings he also goes from general to specific. And in fact, when you're up close looking at this painting, you can see that each little square really functions as its own little abstract painting. And he said that is intentional. One way he keeps it interesting for him, spending months working over the same image, is he thinks of every little square as its own abstract painting. And it's pretty cool. If you're up close, you can see that each square really does function on its own as an abstract image. It's really beautiful. So one of the things about Chuck Close is that about, I'd say maybe halfway through his career, he suffered a pretty bad accident. One of his spinal arteries collapsed. He actually literally collapsed. And he became paralyzed from the waist down. So it actually, wasn't as bad as it could be for him necessarily, because he was paralyzed, of course, but he actually could still paint after this accident. So he wasn't paralyzed from the waist up, had all his motor abilities and things like that, so lucky for him, also lucky for us, we can still enjoy his artwork. And pretty soon after his accident, he rigged up this pretty amazing way of painting, where, this canvas is huge and now he can't get up out of his wheelchair. He has the canvases suspended on a pretty complex system of levers and pulleys and things like that. And while he's in his studio, it's on Long Island, and there's also one in Astor Place, I think, he is able to work and turn these big pulleys and cranks and move the image. It even moves up and down through a huge hole in the floor, pretty awesome, so that even though he can't get up, he can still work on each little square of these images. So it's its own little contraption and setup that he has going. And the first art show he had after his accident, so he did all these paintings after the accident. The art show consisted of paintings before and after the accident. And the curator for this gallery had actually set up all the paintings mixed together. So there was ones from before and after all mixed together, and you couldn't tell them apart. He said that was probably the most touching and, profound moment of his art career, was seeing that this accident actually hadn't hindered him from making his artwork in any way, shape, or form. So pretty awesome, nice, triumphant moment. So the other cool thing about Chuck Close is that would be enough reason for us to come here, cool story, a painter, what does he do, etc. But it's way cooler than that, because Chuck Close now has, and has always had, a disease called prosopagnosia. What is that? Prosopagnosia is when you cannot recognize human faces. So what does that mean? The classic example they use is it's just like tree bark. If I were to say to you, okay, here are these 6 photos of tree bark, and then shuffle them in with 100 other photos of tree bark and said, find the 6 originals, you would say, dude, I can't do that. Tree bark all looks the same to me. It all just looks like random patterns of trees and things like that. That's exactly what human faces are like for someone with prosopagnosia. They cannot tell them apart in any meaningful fashion. They're all just random patterns and noise, and it doesn't really stick out in any meaningful way. Another classic example they use is it's sort of like a rock. If I gave you a rock and said, look at this for 10, 15 seconds, and then threw it onto a beach and said, okay, go find that rock, you would again say, I can't do that. Rocks all look the same to me. They all just look like random rocks. So that's again exactly how human faces look like with people with prosopagnosia. Another classic example they use, sort of a cool one, is that so people with this disease, they have to find ways of recognizing human faces so they can function in everyday life. So for me, they might say, okay, Evan has those gray glasses. Maybe they'll memorize a particular goatee or facial hair or things like that. There's a story of some woman who has prosopagnosia, and she comes home one day, and her boyfriend has shaved off his goatee. So she has basically a mental breakdown because she's hearing her boyfriend's voice, which she recognizes, coming out of a stranger's body. Because the goatee is gone, she can't recognize his face, so she obviously freaks out a lot and has sort of a mental breakdown. So it just conveys how real this thing is. They really cannot tell human faces apart. The thing is, Chuck Close has this disease. That is crazy. That's actually part of why he decided to paint exclusively human faces. He said that he wanted to wrestle with and work with this image, which is the human face, that apparently everyone else can so intuitively understand, but is actually really difficult for him to come to terms with. So, I submit to you that if this man that is in a wheelchair with a disease that prevents him from recognizing human faces can become one of the most famous contemporary painters ever by painting giant images of human faces, then there's really nothing that you can't do also. You really have no excuse for not doing anything that you want to do. So, that's generally what I tell visitors. That's the general spiel I give them at that piece. As for what you need to know to do this piece, you pretty much just need to know what I told you. You don't really need any extra information. I'll link to some of Chuck Close's major works and things like that below this, some of my favorite pieces of his, some relevant articles and things like that. The only thing you really need to know is how to say prosopagnosia. It's a tough word. It is so, pag, no, see, so that's so, pag, no, see, You can look it up. I'll post it below. And once you know that, you can do that piece. So now you have a new piece to do on your tours. In case you have no reason to go to the Modern Art Wing, the next piece I'll do will also be in the Modern Art Wing. And yeah, if you have any questions or anything like that, post them below. I'll link to those relevant docs below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know what you think. See you guys later.